Hello, laddies and lassies. I had not planned to visit Scotland. It was somewhere on my list of places I wanted to visit, but circumstances led me there sooner than I had planned. A friend asked me how and when I was getting back from Europe after I'd been hopping around there for a few months, and I said I didn't know. I had been leaving things rather loose, which allowed me to do things such as meet up with my cousins in Germany. A friend of mine was asking because he and another friend of his were going to take a very inexpensive cruise from Italy to Florida at the end of November. $499 would be cheaper than flying and more pleasant than being cooped up in an airplane. Would be stopping at 3 cities in Spain and one in the Azores. And I'd been wanting to check out the Azores. I had cruised to Europe for free on the Queen Mary due to mistaken identity, but that's a story for another day, so why not return to the US on another cruise? This is me and the captain of the Queen Mary too. But if I stayed in Europe till this cruise was ready to leave Italy, that would present a problem. If I stayed in Europe until November, I would exceed my 90 days I'm allowed in the Schengen zone. Now, I know you may be asking yourself, what the hell is a Schengen? Schengen is a city in Luxembourg. Duh. Next question. Oh, you mean what does that have to do with my going to Scotland, you are asking? The city of Schengen, Luxembourg, is where an agreement on European visa policy was created in 1985. Under the terms of the agreement, anyone from certain countries outside of the zone, including the US, can stay in the Schengen zone for up to 90 days out of 180 days without applying for a longer-term visa. The zone almost completely overlaps with the EU, but certain EU countries, Ireland and Romania to name two, are not part of Schengen, and a few non-EU countries, Norway and Switzerland to name two, are Schengen, but not EU, so it can be a tad confusing. Once I now had an end date for my trip to get the cruise, I added up my days in Schengen countries and realized I'd be exceeding my allotted 90 days in Schengen by 32 days. If I overstayed my visa, I could be banned from re-entering any Schengen country for at least 5 years, or possibly forever. So I decided I would leave Schengen for those 32 days, which meant I would visit Ireland and Scotland and England and spend the remaining time in Bulgaria until I could go to Italy to travel around with some friends and then catch my cruise near Rome. Bulgaria was not yet part of the Schengen agreement, but it is now. And then I would leave my cruise back to the US. I really only had 2 full days in Scotland. I arrived on an Aer Lingus flight on a Monday evening, late after a much delayed flight on a prop plane from Dublin. It had been a long time since I had flown on so small a commercial plane, and I think the delays were caused by them having to wind the rubber bands on the propellers. The small plane was only half full, so pretty much everyone who wanted their own row had it. They did have 3 flight attendants on board, which was perhaps the highest flight crew to passenger ratio I've ever seen. Not that there was much for the flight attendants to do on such a short flight. There wasn't even time for a beverage or snack service. Maybe they were there to assist in an emergency, which given the weather and the tiny plane, they might have anticipated. On one of my days in Scotland, I took a bus tour of the Scottish Highlands, and I was glad the route took me through Edinburgh. Everyone had told me Edinburgh was a more beautiful city than Glasgow, and they were probably right. Edinburgh has block after block of famous old buildings, many tall church spires, and overall a much classier look than the workaday look of Glasgow. It was kind of a coin toss as to whether I'd go to Glasgow or Edinburgh, but Glasgow won for a few reasons. One, it was cheaper to get to and stay in, and there's a chance that I will get to Edinburgh for theatrical reasons. Years ago, we were offered the opportunity to do the stage play that I had co-written, Gamers, at the famous Edinburgh Fringe Festival. But for a variety of reasons that didn't happen, but I'd still like to make it happen one day, so I may make it to Edinburgh. By the way, any young actors want to star in Gamers? More on the bus tour of Scotland coming up in a future episode. Stay tuned. People kept suggesting things to see wherever I was going, and of course, it's impossible to see all of Europe, or even all of Scotland in one trip, or even in one lifetime. One of my favorite things to do in whatever city I'm visiting is to wander. I pick one primary destination I want to see, and then just see what I can see along the way, often detouring for a mile or for hours to see unexpected things. In this case, I had chosen as my primary destination the cathedral, technically called St. Mungo's. One of the most amazing things I came across using this method was the Glasgow City Hall. None of the lists of things to see or do in the city included it, and it turned out to be one of the most amazing buildings I've ever seen. I was glad I stumbled upon it. In front of it was a plaza with statues celebrating some of Scotland's great. William Gladstone was British Prime Minister in the last half of the 19th century. Robert Peel was the Prime Minister in the middle of the 19th century who created the London Police Force, and it's from his nickname that they acquired the term Bobby, which is still applied to cops in London. There was a World War I memorial, and there was also a temporary display for the upcoming anniversary of the Great War, which still seems to haunt many of the places I visited in the UK. The red poppy is the symbol in the UK for remembering fallen soldiers and for veterans. It's based on the poem In Flanders Field, written during the First World War by Canadian poet John McCrae, and it contains the line, "In Flanders Field the poppies grow." On this and other trips to the UK, I saw veterans and others wearing poppies to remember the sacrifice of the veterans. Spoiler alert, it rains a lot in Scotland. So while it wasn't raining for the moment, I decided to explore the park in front of the Glasgow city chambers before the rain started again. I noticed the frieze in some of the statues protected by wire cages to keep the birds out. I noticed the same protection on many older buildings, especially cathedrals in Europe, and I understand why, but the metal mesh does take a little away from the art. But the gray skies made things a little dark for taking photos outside anyway. I found out Glasgow City Chambers is the official name of the building that most of us ignorant Americans would call a city hall. Glasgow City Hall, as it turns out, is a concert venue, which I never got to see. Maybe next time. The inside of the Glasgow City Chambers was even more spectacular than the exterior. Sadly, most of the building is off limits to people who don't have business with the city, but just the lobby and entryway were amazing. I learned the building was started in 1882 and finished in 1888. I guess this much marble and tile work takes a lot of time. And I learned that the building has passed for various countries' important offices in many movies. No one else was stopping in the building, and the woman behind the desk seemed completely bored and nonchalant about my wandering around and taking pictures. The lobby had a bust of Nelson Mandela, which demonstrates the esteem in which the South African leader is held all over the world. The entire building seemed full of history and great architecture and art. One sad bit of history that I was to notice here and in many other buildings throughout Europe is the commemorations of the massive loss of life in their two frequent wars. From smaller wars, they had memorials listing the names of the fallen. But for World War I and World War II, the dead were so numerous they couldn't have a wall plaque for them. Instead, there was a Book of the Dead. It is so sad to think of so many lives taken so young. The necropolis, yes, the City of the Dead, will be the subject of a future installment along with my visit to St. Mungo's. Have you ever been to Scotland? Have you ever found amazing things in your travels while you're on the way to someplace else? Have you ever visited a City of the Dead? Let me know in the comments. Next on Walts Wanderings, we'll head north to Alaska, where I spent the summer of 2024, and I visited Gates of the Arctic National Park, north of the Arctic Circle. Come along for the adventure, and subscribe to stay tuned.